I stood there, watching the city streets, bustling with life, completely unaware of the encounter that would shake me to my core the very next day. It was just an ordinary morning as I walked past the old man, his hand outstretched in silent plea. But I didn't stop. Why would I? I had places to be, cases to win, and I wasn't about to let someone else's misfortune slow me down. But when I saw him the next day, kissing my mother on the cheek, the world around me stopped. At 28, I, Jasmine Smith, had already reached heights my college peers could only dream of. I was a lawyer at one of the most prestigious law firms in the city, and I had worked for every single inch of my success. My presence alone demanded attention, and not just because of my abilities. People noticed me, my carefully maintained pale skin, the way my dark brown hair never dared stray out of place, and my green eyes, which people often said looked like they could see straight into your soul. I was proud of the image I projected. But I'll admit it now, I was arrogant. Sympathy wasn't in my repertoire. I had never known financial hardship, so I didn't know how to relate to it. And frankly, I didn't care to. Helping others? That wasn't my thing. Everyone should take care of themselves, that's what I believed. I used to tell myself, if I could pull myself up, anyone could. I didn't tolerate weakness. And yes, maybe that's why I didn't give that old man a second glance as I passed by. At the office, I was known for being relentless, professional to a fault. I wasn't shy about telling my younger colleagues, if you want something, you chase it down and claim it. My voice carried a strength that left no room for doubt. They admired me, and maybe that's why I kept saying it. It felt good to be looked up to, even if I didn't always deserve it. I'd tell them, with a sense of superiority, I started from zero and built my career alone. If I can do it, so can you. I believed every word of it too. To me, failure was just an excuse for the lazy. My days were rigorous. I'd arrive at the office earlier than anyone else and leave only after the last colleague had gone home. It wasn't just about being there, though. I'd throw myself into every case with an intensity that made me nearly unreachable. I remember one of the partners at the firm telling me during a meeting, "You're the best, Jasmine, and it's no accident." "Thank you," I replied, with a modest smile. "But it's not just talent. It's hard work and determination." That wasn't false humility, it was my truth. I never let anyone forget that. Sure, my dedication left little time for anything else. Personal life? What personal life? I didn't mind though. Professional success was my only goal, my greatest prize. At home, I kept the same discipline. I lived alone in a modern apartment downtown, everything in its place, reflecting my practical and organized nature. I'm a minimalist. I couldn't tolerate clutter, physical or emotional. Everything in its right place, always, I'd mutter to myself, adjusting a picture on the wall. Even in my spare moments, I didn't relax. I studied, keeping my skills sharp, always preparing for the next challenge. And yet, despite all that control, all that discipline, that one moment, seeing that man with my mother, shattered something inside me. Enjoy life? That's for people without a clear goal in mind, I thought as I skimmed through yet another book on the latest legal trends. I barely acknowledged my mother, Lindsay, even though she was sitting right across from me. Lindsay. She's always been so loving, always trying to understand me, even when I didn't make it easy. She looked at me with that familiar concern in her eyes and said, "Jasmine, you're always so busy. Why don't you join me for a walk sometime?" Without looking up from my book, I replied, "Mom, I'm focused on my career. You know how important this is to me, right?" I didn't even stop to think about it. To me, my priorities were crystal clear. Work came first, family second. And even though it bothered her, I couldn't see the emotional distance between us back then. I didn't realize how badly I was ignoring the balance between my personal life and my professional life. Sometimes, I'd reflect, though, in those rare quiet moments. I'd wonder if living such an isolated life was really the right choice. Am I missing something important? I'd think. But I always shoved those thoughts aside as soon as they came. To me, weakness was a luxury I couldn't afford. Life is a competition, I told myself, and any sign of vulnerability could be used against you. So, I'd whisper to myself, there's no room for weakness right now, and I'd get ready for yet another demanding day at work. I had built these walls around myself, convinced that it was the only path to success. I didn't know then how close I lived to a man whose life was so different from mine.
Larry Johnson was a man marked by time and the hardships of life at 75 years old. His skin was always covered in a thin layer of dust, a result of living in various cities across the country for many years. Larry was a beggar, wandering from town to town. Recently, he had arrived in this city, standing on a busy street corner, asking for help. He was well known, but to most people, he remained invisible. His once thick, strong white hair had become unruly and sparse, framing a face lined with deep wrinkles. But his blue eyes were still vibrant, reflecting the wisdom gained from years of hard experiences. "Just a penny, please," Larry would humbly say, holding out his hand, waiting for a small act of kindness. He often thought about his mysterious past, recalling a different life when he had a family and a home. "I had it all, and I lost it all," he murmured, watching the constant flow of people pass by. Though he didn't like to share his story with anyone, in the long, lonely nights, he couldn't help but think about the choices that had led him here. If only I could turn back time, he thought, feeling the weight of his mistakes. Still, Larry persevered, finding joy in small things. "Thank you, may God bless you," he would sincerely say whenever someone offered a bit of help. Every penny was precious to him, and he used the little money he received to feed himself. Sometimes, he even bought something for a fellow beggar he knew. "We've got to look out for each other," he often told his friends who lived on the same streets. Larry believed in the basic goodness of people, though he also knew that kindness was often buried beneath indifference and haste. "Maybe one day, I'll find a place where I can finally rest," he'd think, his thoughts drifting to a future where peace might find him. Larry's wisdom came not just from his age but from the countless challenges he had faced in life. "Life's a tough teacher, but you learn," he would often say when giving advice to a younger person living on the streets. He sometimes shared his past, not to gain sympathy, but to pass on lessons of endurance and resilience. "I've been through a lot, but I'm still here. You can make it through too," he'd say, encouraging the younger ones. The younger ones listened carefully, absorbing his words as valuable lessons. Larry knew his journey was harsh, but he believed every person had the strength within to overcome their struggles. On cold nights, Larry would often sit alone, gazing up at the stars, talking to the ghosts of his past. "Where are they now?" he whispered into the wind, feeling a deep longing for the family he had lost. He knew they were somewhere out there and dreamed of the day they might be reunited. "Do they even remember me?" he thought, tears welling up in his eyes. He hoped that one day he could atone for his mistakes and find peace with the past. "There's still time to make things right," he told himself, holding on to the belief that it wasn't all over yet.
One day, I was rushing to work, just like any other morning. I wore my usual gray suit and high heels, walking with a confidence that came from years of discipline and hard work. As I moved through the busy streets, I mentally reviewed my schedule for the day, organizing the important meetings and appointments waiting for me at the office. I thought to myself, I need to review that contract before the 10 a.m. meeting, weaving through the crowd as if I were on autopilot. Suddenly, a rough voice cut through my thoughts. "Ma'am, could you spare some change?" I barely glanced at the man. His trembling hand stretched out in front of me, begging. A wave of irritation hit me like a gust of cold wind. Why don't people like him try harder? I thought, feeling that familiar knot of frustration tighten in my chest. Without stopping, I threw a quick glance his way, my voice sharper than I intended. "You'd be better off finding a job than begging," I said, my words slicing through the air like a blade. I didn't even try to hide the disdain in my tone.
To Larry, Jasmine's words were nothing more than another obstacle. An irritating reminder of a reality he wanted to ignore. He watched her quietly, choosing not to respond. For a brief moment, his sad blue eyes caught her gaze, but she quickly turned away and continued walking. Larry hadn't expected a different reaction. He was used to the indifference of people. Everyone's got their own battles to fight, he thought, feeling a mix of sadness and resignation settle over him. In the eyes of most, he was just another poor man, someone easily overlooked, unimportant. Larry didn't hold any resentment, but with each encounter like this, another layer of melancholy settled into his soul.
I kept walking, shaking off that brief moment of irritation. "I don't have time for this," I muttered, adjusting the strap of my bag on my shoulder. Life, to me, has always been a competition, and only those with the strongest resolve survive. I've never understood why anyone would choose to live on the streets. In my mind, there's always a way out for those who truly want it. I've worked hard to get where I am, and I firmly believe my success is the result of my own efforts. As for Larry, I barely noticed the sadness in his eyes, let alone cared for it. By the time I reached the office, the encounter had already sunk deep into the recesses of my mind, just another minor interruption in an otherwise busy day. "I've got so much to do today," I thought as I sat down and got right to work. Productivity was everything to me, and I didn't have time for distractions. As I sat at my desk, my coworkers started to file in, greeting me as they arrived. Rachel, one of my colleagues, asked, "Good morning, Jasmine. How was your morning?" I gave a short laugh and replied, "Oh, you wouldn't believe it. Some old beggar tried to stop me this morning, asking for handouts, and I told him to get a job. Like, does he really think he has the right to bother me?" Some of my coworkers paused, some frowning, others listening in silence. Then there was Daniel, the most senior and respected among us, and he couldn't hide his disapproval. "Jasmine, did you really say that?" he asked, his voice calm, but with a hint of disappointment. I looked at him, dead serious. "Daniel, those people need to learn to pull themselves up. We can't just keep handing everything to them on a silver platter." I believed every word I said. Daniel sighed and shook his head. "You were insensitive. You don't know what that man's been through. Sometimes, people just need a little compassion, not judgment." I crossed my arms and rolled my eyes, clearly unimpressed by his argument. Rachel, who was sitting next to Daniel, decided to chime in too. "Jasmine, I respect your dedication and work ethic. But you have to understand, not everyone has had the same opportunities as you. Life on the streets is harsh. Sometimes, just a kind word can make all the difference." But I wasn't about to change my mind. "Look, I've worked hard to get to where I am, and I'm not going to apologize for that. If he wants to get out of that situation, he needs to start putting in the effort," I said, my tone leaving no room for further discussion. My other coworkers exchanged glances, some whispering among themselves. "She really doesn't get it," I overheard one of them murmur under their breath. As I walked through the office, I caught whispers here and there. I knew they were talking about me, but I decided to ignore it. What mattered to me was maintaining my strength, my independence. If I start caring about every single person who crosses my path, I'll never get ahead, I told myself, reaffirming what I've always believed. There's no time to let their comments get to me. I have work to do, I muttered under my breath as I adjusted the strap of my bag and turned my attention back to the pile of paperwork on my desk. But something had shifted in the office. My colleagues had become distant, their casual conversations with me growing fewer and farther between. It didn't bother me, though. They're too sentimental, I thought, brushing it off like a gnat buzzing around me. I resolved to stick to my routine, proud of the stance I had taken. In the back of my mind, I believed they would eventually come to see things my way. They just need to realize how the world really works. People don't change because of soft words. They change because of decisive action, I thought as I typed furiously on my computer, the keys clicking like a fast-ticking clock. Later, I heard from others that Daniel, one of the senior partners, had been thinking a lot about my attitude. He'd always respected me as a professional, but he was concerned about my lack of empathy. "Jasmine, you're an excellent lawyer," he said to me one day as he passed by my desk. "But remember, being a capable person is just as important as being a compassionate one," he added, his expression filled with genuine concern. I smiled slightly, not because I agreed, but because I appreciated that he cared enough to say something. "Thanks, Daniel. I know you're worried, but I'm fine. Let's focus on work, okay?" He nodded, but I could see the sigh he was holding back. He didn't say much more, but I had a feeling he wasn't going to give up on me so easily. Daniel was one of those people who believed I might eventually see the value of compassion. By the time I got home that evening, exhausted after a long day, the smell of home-cooked food hit me as I walked in. It was comforting, if only for a moment. My mother was in the kitchen, preparing dinner like she always did. I could tell she was waiting for me to say something. Without much thought, I dropped my bag on the table and let out a frustrated sigh. "You wouldn't believe what happened today," I started. "Some beggar had the nerve to ask me for money." She turned around, her face a mix of concern and surprise. "And what did you do?" she asked, her voice steady, though I could sense the worry behind it. "I told him to get a job. I mean, seriously. He has no right to bother me," I replied, confident that I had done the right thing. She paused, taking in my words before she spoke. "Jasmine, everyone deserves a little kindness," she said softly, trying to guide me toward a different perspective. "We don't know what that man's going through. Sometimes a small act of compassion can make all the difference in someone's life." She said it gently, hoping, I think, that something would resonate with me. But I wasn't having it. "Mom, you're always too soft. That's why people take advantage of you. In this life, you have to be strong and never let anyone knock you down." I crossed my arms, shaking my head in disapproval. Mom sighed deeply. I could see the hurt in her eyes, though she didn't say anything at first. But I knew what she was thinking. She always wondered where she went wrong with me, how I became so cold, so unfeeling. I've heard her say it to herself before, where did I fail? I tried to teach you to be a good person, to be fair. Kindness isn't weakness, Jasmine. It's strength. She kept saying that, hoping, I guess, that one day I'd finally understand. But I didn't. At least, not then. "Mom," I said, my voice steady, "the world isn't what you think it is. People need to fight for themselves. I've worked hard to get where I am, and I won't apologize for that." She turned back to the stove, stirring the soup quietly. But I could tell her thoughts were far from dinner. I've overheard her talking about Dad, about how losing both him and her own father taught her the value of empathy, of resilience. I guess she expected me to follow in her footsteps, but I wasn't built the same. I never understood how she could be so soft. Maybe, I thought, pain shapes us in different ways. Mom didn't say it out loud, but I could feel the sadness behind her words. She knew she couldn't change the past, but she still hoped she could influence my future. I sat down at the table, flipping through my phone, trying to distract myself from her thoughts. I caught myself thinking, there's no point arguing. She'll never get it. To me, life had always been a battle, and only the strong survived. Her worldview just didn't apply to the harsh reality I knew. If I followed her advice, I'd never get anywhere in life. And so, I brushed it off. I turned my attention back to work, the notifications on my cell phone pulling me away from the conversation. Dinner carried on in uncomfortable silence. But I could tell she was still worried. Mom always worried. Eventually, she broke the silence. Jasmine, I just want you to be happy. To find balance. Success isn't everything. If you lose yourself along the way, what does it matter? I looked at her, her green eyes searching mine. Her green eyes shone with a mix of frustration and confusion. I remember telling her, Mom, I'm happy in my own way. You don't need to worry about me. I said it, hoping to end the conversation. But inside, a small doubt began to take root. Am I really right? For a fleeting moment, the question lingered in my mind. But I quickly pushed it away, convincing myself once again that my approach was the right one. I can't afford to be weak, I reminded myself as the night grew heavier with silence.
At 55, Lindsay Smith was a woman shaped by painful losses. Her bright white skin and wavy, graying blonde hair reflected the passage of time and the adversities she faced. Her always kind blue eyes concealed the pain of a challenging past. 5 years ago, Lindsay had become a widow, losing her husband, Paul, in a sudden illness that struck with cruel, unexpected force. This loss left a significant void in her life, but it wasn't the first tragedy she had faced. 30 years prior, her father had mysteriously disappeared. That event left a deep scar on her heart. The pain of losing the two most important men in her life had molded Lindsay into a resilient and compassionate person. Life tests us in ways we could never imagine, she often thought while looking at old family photos. Lindsay had nurtured a deep sense of family and always tried to pass those values on to her daughter, Jasmine. Lindsay used to say when Jasmine was very young, love and empathy are the foundation of everything. As Jasmine grew, Lindsay noticed that her daughter had developed a completely different attitude. Where did I go wrong? She would quietly question herself, feeling a subtle ache in her heart. Lindsay often reminisced about the happy times with Paul and her father. They were good men, always ready to help others, she thought. She fondly remembered long conversations and the wise advice she received. Paul was a generous man, always involved in community activities. People need our help, Lindsay, he would say. Together, they participated in various charitable activities. Those memories warmed Lindsay's heart but simultaneously deepened her sadness about Jasmine's coldness. Why is my daughter so different from Paul and me? She pondered each night as she prepared for sleep. Lindsay prayed for Jasmine. Dear God, please help my daughter see the beauty of compassion and love, she murmured in her quiet prayer. Lindsay knew that life had been tough for both of them, but she believed in each person's capacity for transformation. Pain can make us stronger and kinder, if we let it, she thought, reflecting on her own experiences. She hoped that, with time, Jasmine would learn this valuable lesson as well. There is always hope. There is always hope, she reminded herself, holding firmly to her belief in resilience against adversity. As she watched Jasmine face life's challenges with a hard stance, Lindsay couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility. Maybe I should have been stricter. Perhaps I should have emphasized the values I tried to teach more strongly, she mused. Yet, she understood that everyone must walk their own path and sometimes learn the most important lessons the hard way. The only thing I can do is to keep showing love and compassion and hope that one day Jasmine will understand their importance, Lindsay thought. That night, like many others, Lindsay lay awake in her thoughts and memories. The loneliness of widowhood had become a constant companion since Paul's passing. The home that had once been filled with laughter and conversation now felt starkly empty. Jasmine spent most of her days at work, and when she was home, she rarely paid much attention to her mother. Lindsay understood her daughter's busy schedule, but the pain of loneliness remained unsoftened. "I miss you so much, Paul," she whispered, shifting in bed to find a comfortable position. The shadows on the walls seemed to dance in rhythm with her memories. She recalled how thoughtful Paul had been. "Do you remember our walks in the park after dinner?" Lindsay thought, a melancholic smile on her lips. Paul always knew how to make her feel special, even with the smallest gestures. "You always knew how to make me smile, even on the hardest days," she reflected, feeling a deep emptiness in her chest. Lindsay got out of bed and headed to the kitchen. A cup of tea might soothe her thoughts. While waiting for the water to boil, she wandered once more into her memories. Sitting at the kitchen table with a warm cup of tea in hand, Lindsay thought about how wonderful it had been to be with someone. Lindsay whispered, "We were so happy, despite all the challenges." She gazed at a photograph of herself and Paul hanging on the wall. They had faced many hardships together, always finding strength in each other. "While you were here, I never felt alone," she thought, feeling tears slide down her cheeks. The silence of the house seemed to scream his absence. Jasmine's cold, busy demeanor could not fill the void left by Paul. Lindsay also thought about her father, who had disappeared many years ago. "I wonder if Dad is still alive," she questioned, knowing the answer might never come. The loss of her father had been a severe blow, but Paul had always been by her side, giving her the strength to move forward. "You being here, Paul, helped me endure everything," she reflected, holding mixed feelings of sadness and gratitude. She wondered how life might have been different if her father had still been close by. If Jasmine had grown up with her grandfather, she might have become a different person, she mused, imagining an alternate past. Lindsay then pondered the importance of male figures in their lives. Perhaps if there had been a male presence in Jasmine's life after Paul's death, things might have been different, she thought. A kind and wise man might have had a positive influence on her worldview, she considered, feeling the need for balance in her daughter's life. "My father's presence might have provided direction, comfort, and examples of strength and compassion," she thought, hoping somehow that presence might appear and help fill the void left by Paul. If Jasmine had someone to give her advice, it might help change her, she reasoned. Meanwhile, Larry had settled into his usual spot under the eaves, seeking shelter from the cold. He chose that spot for its relative safety and good view of the city's activity. Sighing deeply, Larry closed his eyes, allowing himself to be enveloped in memories of happier days. He remembered when he had a family and lived a normal life. There was a warm home and family dinners every night, he thought, feeling a pang of nostalgia. Despite the adversities, Larry never lost hope. Larry wondered, maybe one day I'll find my family. He gazed up at the stars. He pondered whether they still thought about him or if they were still searching. Would they forgive me, he wondered, feeling a tightness in his heart. Larry knew that asking for forgiveness was difficult, but he was ready to try if given the chance. "My daughter always had a kind heart," he murmured, seeking comfort in the thought that she might forgive him. The hope of reuniting with his family was the driving force that kept him moving forward each day.
I woke up early, just like I always do, ready for another day of work. The sun was just starting to rise, its soft morning light peeking through the gaps in my curtains. I got up quickly, feeling that familiar morning energy coursing through me. Got a lot on the plate today, I thought to myself as I headed to the bathroom to get ready. As I was brushing my teeth, memories of yesterday morning's encounter with that beggar flashed through my mind. That man, I muttered, but quickly shook off the thought. Can't let this distract me, I concluded, refocusing on my tasks at hand. Once dressed and ready, I headed down to the kitchen for breakfast. While brewing a strong cup of coffee, my gaze fixed for a moment on the window, where the first rays of sunlight were illuminating the city. Gotta keep my eye on the bigger picture, I thought, reaffirming my resolve. For me, life was about moving forward, and any distraction could potentially jeopardize my plans. Need to review that contract before the 9 a.m. meeting, I reminded myself, taking a sip of my coffee. I knew every day was an opportunity to advance my career, and I couldn't afford to let anything sidetrack me. On my way to work, I was mentally going over my schedule. Meeting with investors at 11, then reviewing legal documents in the afternoon, I listed off while navigating the busy city streets. The encounter with the beggar was still lingering in my mind, but I refused to let it affect me. These situations are unavoidable, but I can't let them derail me, I thought, adjusting the volume on the radio to catch the morning news. I was determined to stay focused on my goals, ignoring anything I considered irrelevant to me. As the day progressed, I maintained my intense work pace. Each task completed, each problem solved, reinforced my belief that I was on the right path. It's all about focus and determination, I thought as I reviewed an important contract. As I was tidying up my belongings at the end of another exhausting day at work, my cell phone rang. It was my mother. I answered, trying to focus on my last task of the day. Mom, what's up? I asked, unable to hide the fatigue in my voice despite my attempt to listen carefully. On the other end, she sounded excited, an unusual emotion that caught my attention. She asked me to come to the city center, saying she wanted me to meet someone special. Her voice was brimming with enthusiasm. I frowned, intrigued. Who is it, Mom? Why so mysterious? I inquired. But her response was vague, telling me I'd see when I got there. She said it was important and that she'd be waiting at the cafe we used to go to when I was a child. I hung up, my curiosity piqued. Who could have gotten Mom so excited? I wondered as I grabbed my bag and headed for the office exit. It had been a long, challenging day, but Mom's excitement was contagious enough to make me take a detour before heading home. It might be important to Mom, I thought, trying to justify this unexpected deviation. Despite my practical, focused nature, something in my mother's voice made me feel I had to go. On my way to the cafe, I couldn't stop thinking about that phone call. This isn't like Mom at all. Who could it be? I asked myself, trying to speculate. I remembered the happy times I'd spent at that cafe as a child. It was where we used to go to celebrate small victories, I recalled with a nostalgic smile. These thoughts made me realize I might be neglecting the value of these moments of connection with my mother. I've been so caught up in work, I've forgotten about things like this, I admitted to myself. Arriving at the cafe, I looked around for her. The place was filled with memories, almost echoing with the laughter of childhood. As I entered, my eyes immediately found her, sitting at a corner table, chatting animatedly with an elderly man. Curiosity stirred within me as I began to walk towards them. But as I got closer, a sense of recognition washed over me. The man stood up and kissed her on the forehead. The gesture made me come to a sudden halt. My heart raced as I realized that this man was the beggar from the day before. What is this, Mom? I called out, my voice laced with clear disbelief. Why are you with him? She looked at me with a mix of sadness and resolve. Jasmine, please. Sit down. There's something very important we need to discuss, she said, trying to stay calm. But I couldn't hide the contempt in my gaze towards the beggar. I don't understand, Mom. Why are you with this man? He's a beggar, a homeless person, I shouted, my voice full of outrage. I could still feel the same simmering anger I had felt when he had approached me the day before. This man shouldn't be sitting here with you. And kissing you on the forehead, he could be spreading some disease, I said, unable to grasp the situation and speaking rudely. He remained silent, but his eyes showed deep sadness. My mother took a deep breath, knowing she needed to be firm. Jasmine, I know this is hard to understand, but you need to listen, she began, holding my hand with affection. This man, Larry, isn't just a beggar. He's my father, who disappeared 30 years ago. Larry is your grandfather, she revealed with an emotional voice. Her words reverberated in my mind, stirring a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Grandfather? But how is that even possible? I muttered, my face showing a look of utter disbelief. Stunned by the revelation, I took a step back, struggling to process the information. This doesn't make any sense, Mom. You always said he disappeared and that everyone thought he was dead, I questioned, my voice trembling with skepticism and confusion. She tried to offer some comfort by holding my hand tightly. I didn't know how to explain it, my dear. It's a painful and complex story. But he's here now, and that's what matters, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. I looked at Larry. He was still standing, his face etched with deep regret as he gazed at me. Finally, he spoke. His voice was hoarse and filled with emotion. Jasmine, I know it's hard to believe, but it's true. I am your grandfather. I disappeared for reasons beyond my control, but I never stopped thinking about you. I've come back to right my wrongs and find my family, he said, his eyes locked on mine. I felt a lump in my throat, unable to respond immediately. The beggar I had despised the day before was now intertwined with the image of the grandfather I had never known. Could this really be true? I thought, feeling even more confused. After a few moments of silence, I took a deep breath and asked, but how did you end up here after all these years? My mother, still with tearful eyes, began to explain. I was walking down the street, as I do every afternoon, and I saw a man begging. Something about his movements and posture drew me in. When I got closer and looked him in the eyes, I knew immediately. He was my father, she said, her voice filled with emotion. It was shocking. Jasmine, I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't just leave him there. Larry added, I had recently returned to this city, gathering the courage to search for Lindsay. But fate brought us together in an unexpected way. I was out on the streets trying to make a living, and then I saw you. It felt like a miracle. He looked at me with pain and regret. I wanted to come back sooner, but I didn't know how. And then fate brought us face to face. I was still grappling with the avalanche of information. My disbelief had not faded. But why did you disappear for 30 years? Why didn't you ever call? Why didn't you try to come back? I asked. My voice was filled with pain and mistrust, as if I were carrying an unbearable burden. Jasmine, I had many issues. Alcoholism, drug addiction, gambling. My life spun out of control, and I felt deep shame about what I had become. I couldn't face you or myself. I lost myself completely, he confessed, his voice breaking. With tears in his eyes, he continued, I tried to come back several times, but shame and guilt were overwhelming. I didn't know how to handle abandoning my family. But now, I'm healthier and have overcome many problems. I've decided it's time to come close to you. I know it's not going to be easy, but I'm here to ask for forgiveness and make up for lost time." Larry looked at me, hoping for some sign that I might at least understand a part of his suffering. I remained silent for a few moments. As I absorbed everything Larry was saying, the turmoil within me was still fierce. Anger and confusion clung to me like shadows, but a small spark of understanding began to flicker in the darkness. "It's too much to process," I admitted, my voice trembling. "Accepting you for who you claim to be, after all this time, isn't going to be easy. 30 years have passed." "It's not simple," I said, struggling to grasp the enormity of it all. Larry nodded, fully aware of the weight of what he was asking for. "I understand, Jasmine. I'm not expecting forgiveness right away. But I hope to rebuild our relationship, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes," he said sincerely. While Larry spoke, Mom held my hand tightly, her voice soft but resolute. "We'll get through this together, sweetheart. You don't need to make any decisions right now. Let's take it one step at a time." I took a deep breath, feeling the support from my mother and the sincerity from my grandfather. "All right. One step at a time," I repeated, trying to find the strength to face this new reality. I knew the path ahead would be difficult, but I also understood that this might be an opportunity for redemption and healing for all of us. Mom turned to both me and my grandfather, her resolve clear. "Let's go home. Dad, I'll get the guest room ready. You'll never have to sleep on the streets again." He looked immensely relieved, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Lindsay. I don't know how to express my gratitude. Being together again means more than words can say," he replied, his voice full of emotion. I watched my grandfather, grappling with the flood of revelations and changes. While I didn't like the idea, I knew I couldn't oppose my mother's decision. After all, he was my grandfather, and I had to accept that. The drive home was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. I drove, while they spoke quietly in the back seat. "I'm glad for you to come home, Dad," Mom said, trying to ease the tension. Larry smiled, though he still looked weary. "I just want to be helpful in some way and make up for lost time," he said, his eyes hopeful. I kept my eyes on the road, striving to keep my inner turmoil from showing. Am I being selfish for feeling this way? I quietly questioned myself. When we arrived home, Mom immediately began preparing the guest room. I observed her, impressed by her ability to forgive and accept, even after years of uncertainty and pain. "I can't believe how incredible you are, Mom," I said, unable to hide my admiration. She smiled, though sadness shimmered in her eyes. "I'm just doing what I believe is right, Jasmine. Family means everything to me," she replied as she finished preparing the room. Larry, deeply moved, expressed his gratitude once more. "I don't know how to thank you, Lindsay. I'll do my best never to let you down again," he promised, as if he had regained his humanity after years on the streets. I retreated to my room and shut the door behind me. Sitting on the bed, I felt the weight of my inner conflict growing heavier. I recalled my colleagues' criticisms of my lack of empathy and my mother's words about compassion. Is my arrogance really pushing away the people who matter most? I thought, feeling increasingly distressed. The image of Larry begging the day before flashed in my mind, and a wave of guilt and regret surged over me. How did I become so cold? I muttered, burying my face in my hands. Guilt began to press down on me like a heavy cloak. I struggled to reconcile my anger, sadness, and shame. He's my grandfather, yet I treated him as if he were a stranger, I thought, tears starting to roll down my cheeks. My mother always talked about the importance of compassion, and I completely ignored it. I felt torn between my desire to remain strong and independent and the need to become more understanding and accepting. I need to change. I can't continue like this, I concluded, filled with deep regret over how I had treated Larry the day before. In the solitude of my room, I began to recognize the impact of my actions and words. How many people have I pushed away with my arrogance? I questioned myself, reflecting on my relationships at work and in my personal life. My mother was always right. Compassion isn't weakness, it's strength. I knew I needed to reconcile with my grandfather and start rebuilding the family bonds I had never known. Tomorrow is a new day, a new chance to become a different person, I promised myself. I resolved to do whatever it took to redeem myself and become a better person. As I was lost in thought, I heard a soft knock on the door. Mom stood there with a worried expression. "Jasmine, are you okay?" she asked as she entered the room. I wiped away my tears and looked at my mother. "I'm just trying to process all of this. It's too much to take in," I admitted. Mom sat beside me and embraced me. "I understand, my dear," she said, her voice carrying both comfort and strength. "But remember, we're in this together. As long as we stick together, we can overcome anything." Her unconditional support lifted a bit of the weight off my shoulders. "Thank you, Mom. I'll strive to be a better person," I responded, filled with newfound resolve. In that moment, I vowed to make things right, to mend the bonds with my family, and to do everything I could to restore what had been broken. She had prepared a special dinner to mark the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. The table was beautifully set, and the aroma of home-cooked meals filled the house. She had created a comforting atmosphere for everyone. She called for grandfather and me, urging us to gather at the table. When he appeared in Dad's clothes, Mom was overcome by a wave of emotion. The outfit fit him as if it had been tailored for him, and his transformation was striking. He looked like a different person, almost unrecognizable from the beggar I had so disdainfully treated the day before. Seeing my grandfather dressed as my father, I felt a lump in my throat. The contrast was stark. This clean and well-dressed man was almost unrecognizable as the same person I had treated with such contempt. As I tried to process the scene before me, my eyes filled with tears. "Before we begin the meal," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "may I say something?" Mom and Grandpa turned their attention to me, waiting for my next words. I took a deep breath and looked straight at him. "I want to apologize for how I treated you on the street yesterday. I was cruel and unfair. I am truly sorry," I said with sincerity. He listened carefully, his eyes filled with understanding and sadness. "I remember the harsh words you said to me when you saw me begging yesterday, Jasmine," he said calmly. "You were so insensitive and harsh. When you came to the café, I recognized you immediately. Knowing that the young woman who had insulted me was my granddaughter was shocking and disappointing. I didn't say anything at the time because I didn't want to cause trouble, but it hurt me deeply. I couldn't understand how someone from my family could behave that way." Hearing his words pained me, but I knew they were true. He continued. "Lindsay never would have insulted anyone. I was shocked to see her daughter act like that," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Mom watched the exchange with a heavy heart. She understood that this moment was crucial for rebuilding our family ties. He reached out and gently took my hand. "I forgive you, Jasmine," he said with a warm smile. "But you need to change your behavior. Everyone deserves respect, no matter the situation," he advised. His words resonated deeply within me. I nodded, feeling tears stream down my cheeks. "I understand, Grandpa. I promise to work on becoming a better person," I responded, my voice full of determination. He smiled, seeing the sincerity in my eyes. "I'm glad to hear that, Jasmine. Life is tough for everyone. We need to be kind to one another," he said, holding my hand firmly. Mom felt a wave of relief and hope, and said, "Let's have dinner now." This is the first of many steps towards rebuilding our family. We all sat at the table, each of us carrying a mix of emotions. Despite the pain and guilt, I felt a new lightness in my heart. I knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to honor Dad's memory and follow Mom and Grandpa's guidance. As we ate, the conversation flowed more lightly, even with the emotions on the surface. Grandpa spoke about his youth, meeting Grandma, and the happier times before everything fell apart. "Life may knock us down, but there's always a chance to rise again," he said, his eyes shining with hope. I absorbed each word like a precious lesson, listening intently. There's so much to learn, I thought, grateful for this second chance to rebuild our family relationships. After dinner, Mom and I cleaned up the table while Grandpa relaxed in the living room. "Mom, thank you for showing me what really matters. I'll try to be more like you and less selfish," I said, smiling shyly. Mom hugged me, feeling proud. "We're all learning, my dear. What matters is that we're together and trying to become better," she replied. Her eyes sparkled with emotion. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was on the right path. I knew there was still much to do. But with my family's support, I believed I could become the person I'd always wanted to be. That night, I went to bed with a lighter heart and a clearer mind. Tomorrow is a new day, a new chance to become a better person, I thought, preparing for sleep. Grandpa's words and Mom's advice echoed in my mind, guiding my transformation. With these thoughts, I resolved to face the future with more empathy, respect, and love, and fell asleep with determination. As time passed, my attitude and behavior underwent a significant change. The arrogance that once defined me gave way to a more humble and compassionate demeanor. Every day became a chance to practice understanding and kindness, and the changes in my life began to reflect in all my relationships. I often recalled Grandpa's advice, reminding myself that everyone deserves respect. I noticed that those around me were responding positively to my new attitude, creating a more harmonious and welcoming environment. For Grandpa's 76th birthday, we decided to host a special celebration. As friends and family arrived for the party, the house filled with laughter and lively conversation. Seeing my grandfather surrounded by love and kindness brought me immense joy. My heart raced as I prepared to speak. "I'd like to say a few words," I began, gazing at him with affection. "Grandpa, since you've come back into our lives, everything has changed for the better. You've taught us valuable lessons about humility, compassion, and the true meaning of family. Before you returned, I was arrogant, unable to see beyond my own needs. But your presence, your stories, and your love have transformed me." My voice faltered, and I took a moment to regain my composure. "I'm grateful to you for not abandoning us, for teaching us the value of kindness, and for being the force that binds us together," I continued, feeling tears streaming down my face. Moved, he looked at me with a blend of pride and love. "Jasmine, you have always been special. I knew you had a good heart. You just needed a little push to show it to the world," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. I smiled, feeling a deep connection with my family like never before. "I know there's still much to learn. But I promise to follow your teachings and strive to be a better person every day," I said, raising my glass to toast my grandfather. "Thank you for everything, Grandpa." The celebration continued with laughter, stories, and memories. Surrounded by my family's love, I felt a profound sense of peace. After everyone had left, Mom, Grandpa, and I remained in the living room, reflecting on the wonderful evening. "It was a special day," Mom said, holding Grandpa's hand. "Yes, Mom. And I want you to know that I will continue to respect everything I've learned and strive to become a better person," I stated with conviction. Grandpa smiled, nodding in happiness at having the family gathered together once more. "We're here for you too, Jasmine." "Always," he said gently. And in the atmosphere of love and unity, our family prepared to face the future together, stronger than ever.
If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to share these stories every day. Don't miss the next amazing story. It's right on your screen now. I deeply appreciate your support. See you again soon.